You've probably felt this before. Your fabric stash keeps growing, but your motivation doesn't. Projects drag on for weeks, nothing turns out quite how you pictured, and sewing starts to feel more like work than fun. These 10 small habit shifts completely changed how I sew. At the end of this video, you'll have a simple roadmap to make sewing feel effortless, creative, and genuinely exciting again. Let's start with a habit that had the biggest impact on my sewing satisfaction. Habit 1, planning my projects. For years, I'd walk into the fabric store with vague ideas and come home with beautiful fabric but no clear vision. Sound familiar? I'd end up staring at my stash, paralyzed by all the possibilities, and half my projects would sit unfinished because I'd lose steam halfway through. Everything changed when I started planning projects before heading to the fabric store. Now, I start by creating inspiration mood boards. I gather images that capture the feeling I want. Maybe it's photos from Pinterest, or magazine clippings, or screenshots from movies. Then, I step back and get specific about details like silhouette, color palette, and styling. Here's what this looks like in practice. Instead of buying a gorgeous floral print and hoping I'll figure out what to do with it later, I start with inspiration. For example, maybe I've collected a lot of images that have that effortless classic French vibe. I'll look them over, add more images, and start to notice the patterns. Like maybe they all feature relaxed button-ups and soft colors. I realized that would work really well for my style, my wardrobe, and my day-to-day life. Now I have a direction. This habit makes me feel more creative and confident in my decisions. I'm more invested in what I'm making because it connects to a vision, not just a random piece of fabric that caught my eye. The key is starting with inspiration images, then narrowing down to specific details before you even think about shopping. Now, if this kind of systematic planning appeals to you, but you want a little bit more structure, you can download a free copy of our wardrobe planner. I'll put a link in the description. This is the same set of planning sheets we use in the Design Your Wardrobe program at Seamwork, and it'll help you map out a cohesive wardrobe plan each season. This planning process became so transformative for my own sewing, it's actually what I use in all the videos I share here on the channel about what I'm making. You'll see me walk through the inspiration, the mood boards, and the specific details I'm trying to achieve in those videos, and it's all based on this free planner. Habit 2. Only buying fabric for specific projects. This one's gonna hurt a little, but it's so worth it. I used to be a fabric hoarder. Sales, clearance sections, just in case purchases. My stash was overflowing with gorgeous fabrics I had no plan for. The problem was, all that fabric became overwhelming instead of inspiring. Now I have a simple rule. If I don't have a specific project in mind for it, I don't spend the money. Before buying any fabric, I ask myself, what exact pattern will I use this for, and when am I realistically going to make it? This prevents that tendency to collect fabric like it's going out of style. It reduces decision paralysis because every fabric in my stash has a purpose. And honestly, it saves a ton of money. When you're only buying what you'll actually use, you can invest in better quality fabrics for the projects that matter. For example, I had my eye on this cherry red Liberty Tonalon forever, but it was expensive and I didn't know what I'd realistically do with it. So instead of spending the money, I saved a picture on Pinterest and trusted it would be there if the right project came along. Then, when I planned out my summer sewing projects, I realized that the fern blouse would be perfect. That's when I made the investment, feeling confident that I'd actually use it and buying the amount I actually needed. Now I wear it all the time and I couldn't be more thrilled with how it came out. I know. What about those amazing sales? Sometimes you do run across something that's too good to pass up, and that's totally fine. But remember that a bargain you never use isn't really a bargain at all. That's why I try to make those impulse purchases the exception and not the rule. Habit 3. Setting realistic time expectations. Okay, this one took me years to learn. I used to think hemming a dress should take 20 minutes. Spoiler alert, it never did. When we underestimate how long projects will take, we end up rushing through techniques, skipping steps, or feeling frustrated when life gets in the way. Now I factor in learning curves, inevitable mistakes, and life interruptions. If I think something will take 2 hours, I plan for 4. This isn't pessimistic, it's realistic. In fact, I find it's a good rule of thumb for planning most things in life. Everything always takes way longer than you imagined. Here's what this prevents: that sinking feeling when you realize you can't finish your dress before the event you plan to wear it to. The temptation to skip stay stitching because you're running out of time. The frustration of rushing through a technique you wanted to savor. When you give yourself realistic time frames, you can actually enjoy the process. You have time to fix mistakes without stress. You can take breaks when your back hurts or your eyes get tired. Double your initial time estimate, especially if you're trying new techniques. Your future self will thank you. Habit 4. Sewing big projects in small chunks. This habit changed everything about how I approach complex projects. I used to think I needed entire weekend days to make meaningful progress on sewing. The result? I'd only sew when I had huge blocks of time available, which was not often. And when I did have those marathon sessions, I'd burn out or make careless mistakes. Now I break every project into small, accomplishable tasks. Instead of sew a dress, I think attach the facing or hem the sleeves. These 30-minute chunks feel totally doable, even on busy weekdays. The magic is that consistent, small progress adds up faster than sporadic marathon sessions. Plus, it's way more fun this way. You're not dragging yourself through hours of sewing when you'd rather be doing something else. Each small session feels satisfying because you complete something specific. Here's how to do this. When you start a project, write out every major step: cutting, interfacing, constructing the bodice, setting sleeves, hemming. Or if your pattern instructions have a table of contents like ours do, you can print that out. Now you have a list of bite-sized tasks that you can tackle whenever you have a spare moment. Habit 5. Alternating easy and hard projects. I learned this one the hard way. I remember once sewing a pair of jeans right after finishing a tailored coat that I'd worked on for a month. I had the jeans all planned out and I had all the supplies, so I felt like I had to work on them next. But tackling too many challenging projects back to back led to major sewing fatigue, and it felt like a chore instead of a joy. Now I deliberately alternate complex projects with simple, satisfying makes. After I finish something that pushed my skills, I'll make a basic tee or try a pattern I've sewn before in a new fabric. Think of it as a palette cleanser for your sewing brain. It builds confidence because you're reminding yourself of skills you've already mastered. And it prevents that overwhelm that makes you want to avoid your sewing machine altogether. My go-to palette cleansers are the Joss pants and the Alice tee. Two easy and simple patterns that I wear all the time. And at this point, I can practically sew them on autopilot. These are the patterns I reach for when I want the satisfaction of completion without the mental energy of learning something new. Your easy project might be hemming pants, making tote bags, or sewing that one dress pattern you know by heart. The key is choosing something that feels relaxing and restorative rather than challenging. Habit 6. Cutting and sewing on different days. This one sounds simple, but it was a game changer for my sewing efficiency. I used to cut out one project, sew it completely, then cut out the next one. Seems logical, right? But here's what I realized. I was wasting momentum. Setting up a cutting station takes time. Getting out all the tools, clearing the space, laying out the fabric. It's a whole production. So now I designate specific cutting days where I cut out multiple projects at once. Then my sewing sessions can focus entirely on construction. In fact, for my fall sewing, I cut out all 6 projects before sewing a stitch. I'll let you know how that went in an upcoming video on what I made, but it definitely saved me some time. Doing it this way is so much more efficient. You're in cutting mode, so you tackle all your cutting tasks at once. Then when you sit down to sew, you can dive straight into the fun part without having to stop and set up for cutting. Here's how to implement this. When you're ready to cut out a project, ask yourself what else you could cut at the same time. Maybe you've been meaning to cut that simple tee pattern, or you have fabric ready for pajama pants. Set up your cutting station once and knock out 2 to 3 projects. Store cut pieces in labeled bags or clear containers so they stay organized, and you can grab whichever project matches your mood when you're ready to sew. I actually keep mine in baskets and tote bags that I hang on my wall. Habit 7. Using a press cloth. This tiny habit upgrade makes an immediate difference in how polished your finished garments look. Iron shine marks can completely ruin the appearance of a beautifully sewn piece, especially on synthetic fabrics or anything with texture. I keep press cloths right at my ironing station. Silk organza is my go-to press cloth material because it's strong, protective, and you can see right through it, so it's easy to press seams accurately. But pieces of cotton or muslin work fine too. Having them easily accessible is key. If you have to go hunt for one every time, you'll be tempted to skip it. Now, nearly every time I press, the press cloth goes between my iron and the fabric. This protects the fabric surface and allows me to press confidently without worrying about damage. It's one of those simple tools that gives you instantly more refined results. In fact, you can use it on all your clothing, handmade or not. It'll help protect everything you wear from damage and help your clothes last. Habit 8. Taking photos of successful machine settings. This is such a modern solution to an age-old sewing problem. How many times have you spent ages getting your serger tension just right, only to forget exactly what settings you used by the next project? Or finally nailed the perfect buttonhole settings but didn't write them down? Now I document everything with photos. Serger tensions, successful zigzag settings, buttonhole configurations, anything that took trial and error to get right gets photographed. In the photo notes, I include what fabric type I was using and what project it was for. This saves so much time and frustration because I never have to retest settings I've already figured out. This also works for noting which needle worked best with which thread, or documenting the exact seam finishing technique that worked perfectly on a particular fabric weight. Your phone becomes your personal sewing reference library. Habit 9. Always testing new techniques on scraps. Even after all these years of sewing, I still test every new technique on scraps before using it on my actual project, every single time. This habit has saved me from countless costly mistakes and built my confidence immeasurably. When you try techniques directly on your project fabric, you're setting yourself up for heartbreak. But when you test first, you're creating a learning mindset rather than a perfectionist one. The pressure is off because it's just a scrap. Testing isn't extra work. It's actually part of the process. Think of it like warming up before exercise. You wouldn't skip warming up and risk injury, so don't skip testing and risk ruining your project. In fact, I recently bought a new sewing machine and needed to use it to sew buttonholes in a knit cardigan. It had a completely different process for sewing them than my old machine, so I made sure to test on interface scraps instead of diving in. And thank goodness I did, because the first ones I sewed were way too narrow and had one side way longer than the other. After a few practice runs, I knew what I was doing and made much better buttonholes on the actual cardigan. Habit 10. Treating mistakes as learning opportunities. Here's the thing about mistakes in sewing. They're gonna happen no matter how much you plan and test. Even the most experienced sewists mess up regularly. The difference is how we respond to those mistakes. I used to let mistakes derail my entire mood and make me want to quit projects. Now when something goes wrong, instead of asking, how did I mess up? I ask, what can this teach me? This simple reframe changes everything. For example, remember when I made that vintage dress a few months ago and accidentally hemmed it way too short? I ended up salvaging it with a ruffle, but I learned a lesson. Get help when you're measuring a hemline and cut it a little longer than you think you need so you can double check. You can bet I won't make that mistake next time. Every mistake contains valuable information like this. This mindset reduces sewing anxiety because you're not afraid of making mistakes anymore. It builds resilience because you know you can handle whatever comes up. And it encourages experimentation because you're not paralyzed by the fear of imperfection. When you embrace mistakes as part of learning, sewing becomes so much more enjoyable. You stop walking on eggshells and start taking the creative risks that lead to real growth. These 10 habits might seem small individually, but together they create a completely different sewing experience. Instead of feeling overwhelmed and frustrated, I approach each project with confidence and excitement. Pick one or two of these habits to start with rather than trying to change everything at once. Small, consistent changes create lasting transformation. The goal isn't perfection. It's creating a sewing practice that brings you joy and satisfaction. And since we're talking about transformation, I want to share something that can accelerate your progress even further. Over nearly 30 years of sewing, I've learned some hard-won lessons that every sewist needs to know. Rules that have made me not just a better sewist, but someone who actually enjoys what I make. Watch this video next to discover the 10 most powerful sewing rules I've ever learned.